Well, as you can see, this Gurian neck joint is a completely different animal. Now, hopefully the camera picks this up, but if you look carefully, you can see that there is a fracture on the outside perimeter of that hole. You've seen the very extensive video that I did on this exact joint, same vintage. This guitar's a few years earlier than the one I covered in that video. When I see this type of thing, I'm thinking, boy oh boy, I think I'm going to do a little bit of re-engineering on this and change it up to make it a little more friendly for the next guy down the road long after I'm gone that needs to reset the neck. So I'm showing you guys this stacked truss rod that Gurian was using at that time. And if you don't know this, you're going to have a hard time. This adjustment nut with the Allen key drive needs to be removed in order for you to pull the neck off. You need to know that. If you're taking a Gurian neck off, there's enough of these guitars out there that somebody's going to run into this, and hopefully they see this video. It's going to save them a lot of grief. Next. There's another angle of that fracture. We're going to start the repair like we did on that other Gurian by filling those holes and gluing some nice press fit dowels into those holes to just strengthen this whole thing and prevent any more breakout like this. So we've taken a much different approach on this guitar than we did on that last Gurian of Andrew's. Okay, well that's the Gurian and that is the Larrivee. We're going to set them both aside and pick up in the morning. This is the Gurian guitar that was shipped up from Albuquerque. And it'll make a lot more sense as I take it out of the jig. And I'll explain again what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. So I'll go ahead and pull it out of the jig. Well, I thought I'd give you one last look at this thing before I disassemble. I actually threaded right into the hardwood because we've got a 2-inch slab of hardwood for a top here. So a very close friend of mine had dropped these right angle brackets off to me, I don't know, a few weeks ago, and as it turned out, I just ended up repurposing them to skim off that Gurian tenon. So there you go. I know a lot of the old-time techs are prone to using the vernacular, stuff that's just lying around and coming up with the goods. And that's what we ended up doing here. My friend got these two brackets at a place called Crazy Bins. I don't know if you have that in the US, but basically what it is a place where all of the Amazon reject stuff is cleared out. So in this case, this thing's worked out beautiful for this purpose. Will I ever use it again? God only knows. There you go. It's a pair of right angle snap shut brackets that I may use again. We'll see. Stay tuned. Well, as you have seen in the last 4 or 5 neck resets, those 3 Martins and the Larrivee and now this Gurian, I'm making this undercut. I have a feeler gauge actually taped to the face of the ebony so it doesn't get marked. And I am making this cut so that the fingerboard is allowed to flex that little bit when we go to glue it back onto the guitar. So what I've got here is a feeler gauge and some 80 grit sandpaper just to kind of clean up what's left over of the mahogany on the underside. I don't have to really clean it up completely. I'm just being fussy. So I'll probably put an edge on that feeler gauge and then just chisel off the... Oh, there we go. Here it comes. That fingerboard will have just a little bit of flex now, and that'll allow us to get it good and tight. So before I glue this cross grain mahogany patch into place, I want to explain why I'm doing it. This is where all the trouble started. The ebony pin that pins down the bottom half of the heel, this is where the fracture was. And that pin fell out, and then the neck pulled up. So I don't really want to alter the Gurian guitar as far as function, and the way around that is to glue on these 2 mahogany straps on either side. And then when we're done, we're also going to face this with mahogany just to reduce any chance of refracture after we re-drill the tapered holes and insert those pins. Here we go with strap number 2. And we will face this joint, this surface here, tomorrow. Is our dry cloth? Alright, now that the neck reset is where it needs to be, we've set it back and we made sure that the trajectory of the outside string lines up with the bridge pin holes. It's even more crucial on the Gurian guitar because it's a very narrow neck. I did talk about this in the last couple of videos. So the real issue is to deal with this high spot here. Because the neck has been set back, we end up having a high spot and then the fingerboard sort of falls off towards the sound hole. So I use this scrub block, which is the smallest block that you get in your fretting kits, and really kind of work the lion's share of this down before I start making my way up the fingerboard. So this is the area that needs the most attention. And stop and check it as I go. Made quite a bit of difference already. I usually kind of sand on an 8 count. Yeah, that has taken care of the lion's share. I'm still going to work it down a little bit more. You do want to keep an eye on the depth of those fret slots as you go. You don't want to sand them right out. Okay, so I'm going to move up to the next block. Still concentrating really here. Although I'm concentrating at this highest spot, I am starting to make my way up the fingerboard now towards the nut. Kind of stopping and checking as I go. Just going to get those outside edges. See, I actually use a block, as you can see, that's quite narrower than the fingerboard, and that's exactly what I want. So there is a slip of leather on underneath the sandpaper, and it just naturally flexes as I'm sanding. It follows this. This is about 28. This is about a 20-inch radius. I think that'll do it. Okay, we'll check that again. Yeah. So I am kind of making my way back. Now there's just the slightest hint of fall off. Hardly even be noticeable when the job's done. I'll bring you in a closer look as we progress. That's 80 grit paper that I've got on there, by the way. I'm pretty happy with that. Alright, I am going to go full length now. I have removed that tapered pin, the bottom one, from the head block. So now we're going to remove the neck. We're going to install the frets into the fingerboard extension so that the top never gets a hit. Okay, for all of you guys that have your radius disc cylinders, we have a pin here. This is the ebony pin that goes through the edge of the head block, and you've seen this in the other Gurian videos that I've done. So what I did was I turned this pencil on the disc sander to the same taper as the pin, And what that allowed me to do was to reach inside the sound hole, push this through the hole in the side of the head block, and mark the point where I need to drill for the pin. I hope this all makes sense. So just push that tapered pencil in and marked the other side of the tenon. I'm grabbing with a side cutters, grabbing that pin, and then kind of prying against the head block to slip it out. Now that it's loosened off, I can reach in and there's the puppy. By the way, you want to wax that puppy before you push it in, because you need to push it in and take it out a few times as you go through this whole process. Okay, now we're ready to drill the other undersized hole because we need to ream it. And I just want to check to make sure we get that hole 100% perpendicular. And that's it. So now we're ready to ream that hole the same taper as the original. Okay, now we know that we got that hole perpendicular. You definitely don't want to ream too far. Ream it, check for fit. Yeah, we got a ways to go yet. We're getting close now. That's the baby. And again, you want to make sure you rub some wax on that pin because you got to bring it in and out a few times yet before the job is done. So this is where you got to remember to put that truss rod back in, because once you glue that neck on, you're not putting it in. You can't put the nut on yet. You have to glue the neck into place before you can put that nut on. Got to remember that. Well, that is our final dry run. Both pins are in. They've been waxed because I'm going to be removing them, of course, to set up to glue. And I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to start on this fresh in the morning. Cheers. Well, we are on the final stretch with this very interesting 1974 Larrivee guitar. A few things I want to point out about it that are pretty unique. So this is where the values ended up on the bridge. Now I need to nudge them all back just a tiny little bit, and we'll come back and check again. When I get to this stage, when it's this close, all these final adjustments with the guitar tuned right up to concert pitch, all 6 strings in tune, I loosen off one string, scrape away at that saddle a little bit with a razor blade, and then tune it back up and check it. And that is exactly what we're about to do right now. So our point of reference is right at the very front of the saddle, so we're just going to scrape it back. Let's check that again. So now we'll do the final adjustment for the nut. So we're going to fret the 12th fret and tune to that note, that fretted note. And open string. It's a little sharp. Check that against the tuner. Oh, look at that. Feed our little deflector plate through there again. This does not need to come back very much. That should do it. So before I finish up with this Larrivee, 1974 Larrivee, a couple of things I wanted to point out. It's interesting to see the sort of double scoop, on the back braces. I'm sure he'd probably roll his eyes now, but they're all intact. They didn't split. It was obviously something he was experimenting with at that time. So this is obviously a signed label. It's interesting that there is a classical guitar on this label telling me that it's likely that this must have been a very early steel string guitar. He was sort of venturing in that direction at this point in 1974. The other thing I find kind of fascinating on this is the grain on the head block is vertical instead of horizontal. This hand-cut dovetail on this guitar was very shallow. And this is why I installed that Murakoshi fastener on the bottom tip of the dovetail to pull that heel in tight. So it is glued and bolted. Of course, bolting a guitar neck on now is kind of par for the course, from Taylor to Collings to Breedlove, and of course Robert Godin, who kicked the whole thing off decades before everybody else. All right, now I'm going to string it up. Now that all the